Everybody, welcome back to the show. Hope you had a lovely weekend. Glad to be with you on a Monday. Weather is slowly starting to snow here. Hopefully, the weather's good where you're at. I had a news article come across that I thought I would share with you because it's kind of an ongoing topic in my circle anyway, and I thought I'd share it with you. Um, so, Indigenous identity is once again making the headlines. This time it is with to do with the Gladue, which is a legal context, I guess you'd call it. Um, so for those not familiar with that, Gladue is something that Indigenous people can apply for consideration when sentencing in the court for colonial traumas and impacts on them, their communities, and so forth. Now, what is happening is that, of course, this is making headlines, as you can see, because there is a ongoing discussion about the process of determining who gets to apply and who doesn't, and how you do, and who's authentically Indigenous to apply for Gladue and who's not. So advocates are concerned that there's no proper process for Indigenous identity claims, and that these false claims are, of course, wasting the court's time. There's a process that goes into making a claim, writing a claim, submitting it to the court, having the court review it, then to find out, is it valid, is it not valid? And so the advocates putting this forward and some of the people involved in the process are concerned, of course, about the whole issue. Now, of course, you get people like Daryl LaRue commenting on his website and in this article. If you're not familiar, his website is called Race Shifting, saying that false claims by white folks is harming Indigenous people in various ways. Of course, this claim doesn't go on to specify how Indigenous people are being harmed. The article is really talking about wasting time with Indigenous identity claims that can't be accurately verified. So the courts are reluctant, of course, to gatekeep any Indigenous identity issues, which they should, right? That's not their job. Their job as a court in this instance exactly is not to determine who and is or is not Indigenous, but simply use the claim in sentencing as it's impacting. So they said that there should be a proposed mechanism that is a test that they have a connection to an Indigenous community. So I don't know if you're familiar. In 2015, there was in Ontario a court case where a judge ruled against a Gladue applicant. He said the submission was unclear, and the judge didn't have. Let's see what it say. And the judge was not clear on the Indigenous claimant's claim. However, Rudu, who is one of the people who helps submit these applicants' claims for Gladue, stated that it wasn't really the judge's place to determine a person's Indigenous identity. So if you put forward a claim, it's not, but in this case, the claimant put forward a claim to Gladue. The judge didn't feel the claim was sufficiently, clear, was conflicting, and so the judge didn't allow it. Of course, that's not the judge's job, but again, it goes to show that people are making Indigenous claims in the court system for the purpose of sentencing that aren't exactly clear to the court's liking. So what does that mean if in this whole scenario you have people who may be submitting fraudulent claims because they think the claiming Indigenous identity is a get out of jail free card, or somehow you're going to get reduced sentencing if you can claim colonial trauma and an Indigenous past? It is problematic. Of course, this article again is silent on what is the percentages, how many people are looking to use this process in sentencing in the court system. What is that number? We are constantly given this information as though the system is overrun with fraud. We simply don't know that that's true or not. But if they're going to move or advocate for a process to determine who is authentically indigenous and allowed to make claims in the court system, who determines that system? If the government is to create the test of authenticity, who decides what's a valid community? If you have people like Daryl LaRue involved, you can guarantee that if you live in Ontario and or Quebec, you are largely in the Maritimes, you're not going to be Métis for sure. And what constitutes an Indigenous community when you live in provinces that don't have treaty, such as Quebec? What makes an authentic Indigenous community? Who gets to determine then if that community is valid? Who gets to determine valid membership in that community? If you're out west and there's organizations like the Métis Nations, does that mean if you are going to court and you need to use this clause, the only way you can do that is to pay for a membership in this organization? And that organization can take years to get back to you of whether you're a valid member or not. But that's a paid subscription. Now, that paid subscription to those organizations could then in turn help you in your court case. That might be valid, but that's a voluntary thing. Your identity shouldn't and isn't determined by whether you belong or don't belong to a government-funded organization. If you're a First Nations individual and you happen to live on reserve, that might be clearer. What if you live off reserve and you live in an urban area? What if you're a non-status First Nations person? Where do you stand there in being able to prove your claim? So these are the problems I have when we talk about Indigenous identity. You talk about the court system. You talk about how do you authentically validate or invalidate someone's identity? What makes their claim authentic or inauthentic? And I think there's variables in there. We have people who have clearly frauded this system and imagined themselves to be Indigenous who aren't. But the percentages of these claims that are going through and the venue, the way they're being put forward isn't as clear as we'd like to believe. They're not being overrun with fraud. What is the percentage? Second, who gets to decide? Is it you? Is it me? Is it the government? Is it a paid government organization? Who? And I think that's a valid conversation that Indigenous people need to have in their communities. And I mean, it's been frustrating this whole time since doing this show. This keeps going around and around, and the same actors seem to be involved for and against. So I'd like to hear from you. What do you think? Is your community going to be considered a valid Indigenous community? What if you live in Ontario and Quebec? What about your communities? Will you ever get to use this because there are no Métis people there? An interesting discussion. Anyway, if you like this episode, hit the like and subscribe. Please share the program, help us grow. We're on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. And as always, until next time, keep the shiny side up. The Jig is Up is made possible in part by the Métis Federation of Canada, uniting Métis people from coast to coast to coast.